To everybody joining us, I think some of you might be joining us for the first time, so welcome. And those who have been to our first webinar on E2 visas, welcome back. My name is Nita Updadhye. I am the managing attorney of NNU Immigration. We're an immigration practice in central London focused exclusively on U.S. immigration. And to better serve our clients and to potentially gain new clients into our firm, we are looking to do a series of webinars. We started out with E2 visas last month, and this month we're working on presenting an L1, which we'll present to you today. And if you look at our website, we're going to have a series of other webinars. We're trying to do one every month to educate and inform you on the latest in U.S. immigration, one topic at a time. So today we're covering L1s. We have a brief period of time to cover a lot of material. But hopefully the takeaway, what you'll take away from this as a listener is that you'll understand the basic requirements of the L1 intercompany transferee. You'll understand sort of the preconditions, what you are going to need to achieve in order to get an L1. And then we'll also talk about sort of timelines and procedures for the L1. So I'd like to make this as practical of a webinar as possible. And I've got some slides that I will get started on now. Okay, the L1 intercompany transferee visa. So what is it? So overall, generally, what it allows is for an individual who's been working for a company outside of the U.S. for a minimum of 1 year, allows that person to transfer to a U.S. subsidiary, parent, or affiliate office. Now, the individual has to have been working for the company for 1 year within the last 3 years prior to entry into the U.S. So there's no requirement that at the time of filing the L1, that individual is working for the company. Typically, that is the way L1s are filed. But according to the law, if that person, a qualified individual, has been working for a company within the last 3 years, then that person can be a beneficiary of an L1. And they're, generally speaking, for most companies, there has to be an individual petition filed for each person that they would like to send to the U.S., unless the exception is blanket L classification. We'll talk about that in a moment as we go through this half hour. So the overarching thing to know about the L1 is that it is a visa for qualified employees, either managerial level employees or specialized knowledge employees that are going to the U.S. to work for a company that they've been working for outside of the U.S. for at least a year. Now, there are two kinds of L1 employee. There's the L1A, executive or manager employee, and there's the L1B, which is the specialized knowledge employee. So we'd just like to go into covering the L1A classification. Now, the L1A, there's sort of two types of L1A employees. You either have a managerial employee, or you could have an executive employee. And you do have to make it, there is a distinction there. So you have to make a decision as to do you or does your employee fit into either a managerial role or do they fit into an executive role? And then, based on the definition, then you have to build that evidence around that definition. So you don't want to waver between this, our person is both an executive and a manager. For purposes of getting an L1 visa, you want to show that the individual is either an executive or a manager, and the evidence supports one of those decisions. Now, in terms of just the general distinction, an executive is just that, someone who is extremely senior level in the company. Just think CEO, think COO, CFO. Those are generally executive level roles, and it probably fits into the definition here. So, the things to look at to determine if someone's an executive, do they manage an important function within or a component within the organization? Do they establish goals and policies within that component? Do they have quite wide discretionary decision-making power? And do they receive very minimal direction from any more senior level executive. So that's how you would define an executive, and really that would have to be supported by evidence from the company, showing what kinds of decisions that they make, showing sort of if it's a CFO, what are their financial responsibilities for the company? Are they, the key person within the organization that makes decisions on budgeting and on how funds are being spent within the company? So, so you can build your case around that if you think that person meets that executive definition. Then you could have an L1A employee who is a manager. And a manager is someone, there's sort of two levels of manager. There could be a manager of people. So that could be someone who has people who are reporting directly to that manager. But then you could also have functional managers. So that could be someone who may not be as senior as an executive, but is managing an important function within the organization. I think a good sort of test is to do kind of a percentage test. Lay out what that manager, purported manager, does on a day-to-day basis, and look at the percentage of time that person spends on those tasks to determine whether are they mainly managing people or are they managing a function. And it also is a good way to distinguish, are they executives or are they managers? With the manager, you're looking at, yes, do they manage an important subdivision or a function or component within the organization, or do they supervise the work of others, and also do they have authority to hire and fire and take personnel actions, and do they exercise discretion over day-to-day operations of the function? So there is some overlap between an executive and a manager, but I guess one of the big distinctions is that typically executives may not have a lot of direct reports. It may not be sort of line managers managing the day-to-day work of more junior employees, and that would fit more into the managerial definition. Again, an executive is someone who's extremely high level within the organization. A manager could also be a high level person, but may not have the overarching level of responsibility that an executive does. So you do want to look at clearly distinguishing between the two. Yeah, again, just to recap, is this person going to be in a managerial or executive position? And do they have at least one continuous year of employment with the organization? And you also want to look at that person's prior training and employment to show that they really do clearly meet that senior level status. Now, just going a little bit more into what kinds of questions, and I talked just a minute ago about, you want to look at sort of listing the job duties and putting down percentages, because that helps to just give a balance to what their duties are, and are they spending the majority of their time managing people, or in some cases they might be doing more entry level or junior level work, in which case you would have to determine if they might fit more into a specialized knowledge role, and we'll cover that in a moment. So some of the things that you want to look at as to whether this person is a manager and what you would want to present in your application would be, these are the questions you want to ask yourself. Will that person be managing an organization, department, or subdivision? And describe that. What is that? You don't want to simply say they are managing an important department or subdivision. You want to clearly define it and isolate exactly what that function is that they're managing. And also why it's so important and central. Build the case as to why it is so central to the company. The other question to bring up in preparing the application is, will the person supervise and control the work of other supervisory or professional employees? So this is a key thing, that if you've got someone who's managing a number of people, the people that they're managing, according to the regulations, the subordinate employees also have to be professionals, degreed professionals. So if you've got a line manager in a company, if they're managing folks who are not degreed professionals, even if they are managing them, for L1 purposes, they may not be seen as a manager under the definition. So look closely at that. So they might be managing people who don't have degrees. So then you're left with thinking, so how do we position this person if we're trying to get them an L1? Well, then perhaps look at, could you make the functional manager case for that individual? There could be a possibility of that. The other thing to look at when building a case is, will the employee have authority to hire and fire or recommend personnel actions, and give examples of that. You know, when have they, who have they hired, and you know, in what function are they within the hiring system or hiring process? Maybe they have created the hiring protocol, or maybe they are actually just interviewing and hiring individuals. In any case, that would fit into the category of having the authority to hire and fire. The next thing to look at is, will the person be making decisions on daily operations of the activity or the function under his or her authority? So again, we want to look at building the case around these points, and this one being, what are their daily decisions? What operations do they make decisions on a daily basis? Next, you want to look at, will this person be establishing goals and policies? Now, we talked about that being a little bit more of an executive level responsibility, but it's useful to talk about what kind of goals and policies is a manager involved in, and that shows that they are in a senior level role within the company. Also want to discuss in the application, what kind of discretionary decision-making power do they have within their day-to-day job, and what kind of responsibility? Who are they reporting to? Really is the question. So do they have only general supervision, or do they have to report to someone on a daily basis? You know, ideally with a manager, they could have responsibility to report to, you know, the CEO, CFO, or more senior people, but at the same time, they have the ability to perform their role without too much hindrance from more senior level folks. So these questions here on this slide are really meant to just sort of shape and frame the case for the L1A intercompany transfer case. So you'll want to look at how you can prove each one of these points when you're putting together the petition. So I want to talk about the L1B. Before I do that, I'm really just touching upon procedures. So we're talking about the requirements for the visa categories, and we talk about providing the evidence and putting together the evidence. Well, exactly what's the procedure for submitting an application? So what you really need to do is put together as much sort of supportive documentation as you can in connection with the case. So that would be, you know, a quite detailed and well-drafted company letter. It would be contracts, for example, that the manager or executive has been responsible for. If they're responsible for individuals, then we have to have a list of all the individuals that they manage and oversee. If they're involved in an important function of the organization, what does that entail, and what kind of supporting documentation can you provide to buttress that claim? So there's a number of forms, an I-129 form, an I-907, a G-28. There's a company supporting letter. There should be sort of an attorney letter that really gives strong legal basis for the approval. And then there's a number of well-organized supporting documents in addition to that. So when we say you want to support the argument, It's really just putting together as much supportive documentation in the form of letters, in the form of contracts, in the form of organizational charts, employee lists, anything that you can come up with to show and to clearly demonstrate to a USCIS caseworker that this person is eligible under the law. So talking about then moving on to L1B intercompany transfer. So we talked about L1As and the executives and the managers and looking at their managerial high-level responsibilities within the company. The other type of employee that could qualify for the L1 is a specialized knowledge employee. Now, these have become even more challenging. This has been a challenging visa category for many years, but I think that it's become even more challenging to the point where at times if we can find another visa category to put this person in, we'll try to avoid the L1B because of the lack of predictability in the outcome. We could put together what we think is the strongest possible application, only to find that that caseworker pokes holes in it and challenges it in a way that makes it difficult to overcome. Nevertheless, it is not impossible to get an L1B approved as long as you first know the basic requirements and you put together an incredibly well-documented application. So specialized knowledge is defined as one which the individual possesses the company's they possess knowledge of the company's techniques, management, equipment, practices, the policies of the organization, anything that's really specific to the company, anything that's germane to the company or that is proprietary to the company. The more proprietary the technique or the equipment is, the better that specialized knowledge L1B application becomes. The key thing you want to look at is, the key thing that the caseworkers are now looking at USCIS would be, can a US worker do this job? It's a little bit difficult to say for a CFO that's well entrenched in an organization, oh, someone can easily pick up that job because they know that company extremely well. But for specialized knowledge, for some reason USCIS seems to think that a US worker, someone out there should be able to do this. And so it's incredibly important to document it so well to show that a US worker couldn't easily pick up the job. Now, it's acceptable to say, yes, a US worker could be trained to do the job, but it's not economically feasible to hire a US worker because it would take X number of months, 6 months, or even a year to train the person up to a point where they would be operating at the level that this person, the beneficiary, would be operating. So you do want to be realistic. You don't want to put in your case that nobody could ever possibly perform the role that this person will perform. Well, that might not be so realistic. But it is sensible and acceptable to say that the company, for business reasons, needs this person's expertise in the US now. It's also worth talking about, if it's true, is the person going to be training local people? Well, then that makes the blow, I guess, a little bit easier to that caseworker. Okay, they're coming to the US, but they're not taking over any US jobs because they're actually going to be creating jobs and paying people and training people. So here are some of the points, we covered some of the points for L1B to factor in and consider when you're building the case. These are the points to factor in when you're building the L1B case. So you want to actually clearly identify and state the product, the service, the tool, the research, the equipment, the process, or procedure that person is using his or her specialized knowledge for. Again, it seems quite pedantic, but you do have to be as clear and narrowly defined on the specialized knowledge as possible. You then want to look at explaining how that knowledge is different than other similar positions within the industry. It's also, we're talking about within the company. We've seen challenges where USCIS says, if this is a software company, you're saying that this software engineer has unique specialized skills. Well, doesn't everybody in the company have those skills? Because it's a software company, everyone should be expected to know that. So it is worth looking at the individual and how are they distinct from anyone within the company. It could be that they've been working on a certain client and maybe their skills aren't any different, but their knowledge of a client is unique. So that could be one point to make to distinguish them from others in the company. It's more difficult, you know, when we get pushback from USCIS saying, prove that this person has unique skills within the industry. That's quite a bit more challenging because, of course, take, for example, a technology company. There's lots of technology companies out there. But I guess then you've got to talk a lot about what is the product? How is this product unique that this company offers? And therefore, how is this person's position within the company and knowledge within the company unique? So you really want to try to make the person and the person's skills as unique and as high in demand as possible. You also want to look at you want to describe how the knowledge in the position is advanced. And so again, you don't want to, even though the person only needs a year of experience within the company to qualify for L1B, you ideally don't want to say this person has limited experience and, you know, is an entry-level employee. It's more difficult to make a case that someone is an entry-level employee and specialized knowledge. So you'd ideally want to say that and explain how someone is advanced within the organization and certainly has advanced understanding of processes and procedures. So that could be a way of distinguishing employees. There might be a lot of software engineers, but there's junior software engineers and there's more senior ones who have more intimate knowledge of specialized procedures and processes. You want to explain how your equipment or your system or the product or technique or service is special within the international marketplace. That lends itself well to a strong L1B application. You ideally want to be able to explain then why can't someone else in the field easily perform a job. That's one of the key considerations now with really virtually all visa applications. It's also useful to state the minimum time required to gain the knowledge that this person already has. What kind of training would the person need to do the job? And what kind of training has the individual that you're sponsoring? What kind of training do they have for this job? And lastly, another point to consider is what significant assignments has the person performed to enhance the company's productivity, competitiveness, image, or financial position. So give concrete examples. And I would say in this case, even in terms of supporting documents, yes, show the, not only show the contract that they might have worked on, but describe clearly or show documentation about the particular technology that they developed or the program that they developed and how it enhanced the company's position. Yes, I want to cover, so we have 6 minutes here. And in the last 6 minutes, I want to talk about the blanket L classification and then sort of some final tips on getting an L1B sort of across the finish line or things to consider. So for a blanket L, I mentioned at the beginning that there's sort of 2 ways of getting out. And one is company sponsors an individual, files an individual petition, sends that petition to USCIS. If it then gets approved, that individual can appear at the embassy to apply for a visa. Now, there is an exception for companies that have generally that have at least 3 global offices and 25 million in revenue in the United States. They qualify for blanket L classification. And that then allows for, once the company is approved, then it allows for the individuals who are seeking visas to go directly to the embassy to apply for the visa. Because there's no need for an individual petition, so that process is bypassed for the employees in question. And so just going through briefly the qualifications. So the company has to be trading, engaged in trader services. They have to be doing business in the U.S. for at least a year. They have to have at least 3 domestic or foreign branches, and they have to meet one of the following criteria. Either 10 L1 individuals approved over the previous year, or a U.S. workforce of 1,000 people, or 25 million in revenues. For all of our clients, generally, usually it's for those who meet that level. Usually it's the 25 million in revenues. That's sort of the easiest to prove to satisfy the blanket L. So once the company's approved, then individuals can submit their L1As or L1Bs directly to the embassy. Those applications also have to be thoroughly documented, and that the individuals really should be prepped for that appointment, because a lot rides on that appointment, because that's the first time the government agency will be reviewing that person's background, and so they have to present their case extremely well. Yes, so really just covering once again the blanket L. The benefit of the blanket L is that it provides the employer with a lot of flexibility to transfer at relatively short notice, because once that company application is approved, even though that takes a lot of effort, once that is finally in place, there's a little bit more flexibility, and companies, can give relatively short notice to try to send someone over. Initially, the petitions are approved for 3 years. Thereafter, for an indefinite period. We're talking about the blanket L for the company. For individuals, L1As, the maximum time is 7 years, initially 3 years. For L1Bs, the maximum is 5 years, again, initially 3, with the exception of a new company that hasn't been operating for more than a year. Individuals can only get 1 year initially, and then can file extensions. The other key thing to note for blanket L1B, specialized knowledge under the blanket, those employees really should have university degrees or credentialed equivalents. So they do look at university degrees for L1Bs under the blanket rules. So that covers the blanket. We've covered L1As briefly and L1Bs. In terms of sort of final takeaways, final tips, the L1 is, a lot of people know about the L1 and they assume that this is the route they want to take, and we get calls about the L1s, and people say, I think we need an L1, what are your fees, what is your process and your timelines? Well, we actually do take a closer look. We don't just dive into an L1, because we look at maybe an E2 is a better option, and we covered E2 last month. In our previous webinar, but we don't only dive into L1s if there's another visa type that might be more suitable, where there might be a more predictable outcome. So the L1s are extremely challenging, not impossible, but they do have to be thoroughly documented. You have to brace yourself for a challenge from USCIS, because the application, no matter how strong, is likely to be challenged. But if it is well supported and well documented, you stand a good chance of meeting that challenge and ultimately getting an approval. You do want to work with the right lawyers to get this through, and we'd be pleased to work with anybody interested in pursuing the L1 or any other type of visa. You can also watch our E2 webinar from our website, and we thank you so much for tuning in here. If you want to reach us, you'll see the screen, our contact details. Please do tune in to our future webinars. There's a whole schedule on our website, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar. Thanks, and have a great day.